The history of eugenics is controversial, difficult, and emotional. At its heart, it asks the question whether some human life is more valuable than others. The question is, to whom is life more valuable? Is it the state, the nation, the race, future generations, parents, families, or communities? It is essentially a reductionist way of thinking, reducing people to categories with an empirical value, because they are either fit or unfit to live in society. We saw in session 1 that the term eugenics originated with Francis Galton and his view that we ought to selectively breed humans for quality in the same way as we selectively breed dogs or horses. He said eugenics on bringing no more individuals into the world than can be properly cared for, and those only of the best stock. In practice then, eugenics would involve two different approaches. Discouraging the unfit, however society chooses to define that term, from producing children. But it would also encourage productive, fit people to marry and have more children. For Galton, this would involve a system of arranged marriages and some method of preventing undesirable matches. Reginald Punnett was the world's first professor of genetics in the University of Cambridge. He was one of the people who pioneered the establishment of Mendel's thinking in science. Punnett was concerned with feeble-mindedness, by which he meant low educational attainment. He believed that this was caused by a single gene, which was recessive. Therefore, eliminating all people with feeble-mindedness would not eliminate the recessive allele from the population, because most of the alleles would be hidden in people who were heterozygous, with one copy of the feeble-mindedness allele hidden. And feeble-mindedness would reappear in each generation in a quarter of the children they produced. Therefore, he argued that if we wish to rid the world of feeble-mindedness, we will have to find some method other than simply eliminating the feeble-minded people themselves. From an ethical point of view, it is interesting that he was even prepared to consider eliminating feeble-minded people, which shows the power of reductionist thinking in action. In 1930, the statistician Ronald Fisher produced a very important book on natural selection, which changed how scientists think about Darwin's theory of evolution. 1/4 of that book was dedicated to Fisher's thinking about eugenics, and he used the 1911 census data to show that people in lower social classes had more children than those in more educated, wealthier, middle and upper classes. Thus, he argued, what was needed was some form of welfare payments to encourage the fitter members of society to produce more children. Fisher was a strong advocate of eugenics across Europe, and even refused to condemn the eugenics movement in Germany in the 1930s. There has been in recent days a revulsion against Fisher's contribution to eugenics. In June 2020, Fisher's Cambridge College, Keyes College, removed a 1989 stained glass window which commemorated Fisher's work, and his old workplace, the Rothamsted Research Station, was forced to issue a statement in June 2020 condemning Fisher's involvement with eugenics. Thus, emerging from the work of a number of very eminent English geneticists is the idea that eugenics can act in a positive way. Positive doesn't mean good in this context. It means producing interventions that change behaviour. These positive interventions would encourage fit people to have more children through financial incentives. Unfit people would be educated about eugenics and would selflessly forego their right to have children in order to prevent the spread of their undesirable heredity. Negative eugenics works by preventing people doing what they want through marriage restriction, segregation, sexual sterilisation, and, in its most extreme form, euthanasia, killing affected people. The early geneticists were not stupid, but they did not share contemporary social values. They felt it was their responsibility as scientists to offer support to shaping society. However, they were not able to see beyond the limitations of their own genetic models. As Spencer and Paul argue, the rise and fall of eugenics is a lesson that most modern medical geneticists and indeed social scientists would do well to heed. There is clear evidence that the eugenic policies that were being proposed in Britain and in the United States influenced scientists in Germany, which were picked up by the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler, who embraced warmly the hereditarian principles involved. This ultimately led to the dreadful destruction of life during the whole of the Second World War, and especially the Holocaust. The voices of the Holocaust survivors are important, and their stories should be heard. It represents the antidote to reductionist thinking. Many people think that state-controlled eugenics disappeared after the Second World War and the liberation of the prisoner camps. However, the true situation is much more complex than this. In 1998, Nicholas Agar published a paper entitled Liberal Eugenics. I, perhaps less charitably, call it consumer eugenics. Liberal eugenics is a contemporary feature of society, and the rest of this presentation will give an outline of that. In the mid-1970s, a lawsuit was taken by Dolores Becker and her husband against their medical practitioners in the New York State Court of Appeal. They claimed that the physicians were negligent. Becker had become pregnant at the age of 37 and given birth to a Down syndrome daughter. Her complaint was that the physician had not informed her of the sharply higher risk of such births among older women over 35, nor had he offered Becker amniocentesis, That's a test that can discover whether the fetus has Down syndrome. Becker also wanted to call their physician to account on behalf of their Down syndrome daughter for the wrongful causation of life. They argued that the daughter had been denied fundamental rights of the child to be born as a whole, functional human being. The case was dismissed because the court decided that the question of the fundamental rights of the child was more philosophical or religious than legal in basis. Down syndrome is a condition that develops when a fetus has an extra copy of chromosome 21 and therefore has 47 chromosomes in all of their cells. It occurs because of an error in the way that the chromosomes are allocated to sperms or eggs during cell division. This is most likely to occur in older women, but recent research suggests that male sperm can also carry the chromosomal mutation. There are two medical procedures that can be used to test whether a fetus has Down syndrome early on in the pregnancy. The first of these is called amniocentesis. The second technique is known as chorionic villus sampling. CVS can be performed at an earlier stage of pregnancy than amniocentesis, but both tests can provide an indication as to whether or not the child has Down syndrome. Neither test is 100% reliable, and false positives saying that a child has Downs when it hasn't is a possibility. The Abortion Act in the UK allows for terminations of pregnancy up to about 24 weeks, although if there are fetal abnormalities there is no time limit. It is worth investigating what the impact of these two prenatal tests have had on the birth of children with Down syndrome in Europe and in the United States in the last 20 years. This is an area of extreme delicacy and controversy, with passionate and strong views on all sides. And the ethics of how medical practitioners deal with mothers carrying Down's fetuses is complex. There are those who would argue that the presence of these tests is leading to a genocide, that's a deliberately chosen word, a genocide of children who are a natural variation of human babies. There are others who argue equally passionately that it is important for the mother to have the freedom to choose whether to bring a Down child into the world. At this cutting edge of technology, liberal eugenics could so easily merge into a broader consumer eugenics.